hope and trust, matters are not as bad as they appear.
Not only that, but I'm freezing to death. I ain't got much on under my coat.
Hello, my name is Tony Probst. Today I'm sharing with you my extensive artifact collection that I've collected over the years from the Titanic, Olympic, Britannic, and the Carpathia, and a few other goodies thrown in. I was given my first artifact in Tahiti in 1970 while sailing around the world with my brother, sister, mother, and father on our 47-foot trimaran, the Lorelei 3. That's me in the center. A man was walking down the dock in Tahiti wearing a nail around his neck. It turns out he was Lewis Marden, the person who found the bounty on Pitcairn Island in 1957 while working for National Geographic. He gave me a nail from the bounty, and from that moment on, I fell in love with collecting maritime history. I have visited Pitcairn Island 5 times, exploring the island and diving on the bounty. For those who would like to see the very first drone video ever made of Pitcairn Island, you can find it below. All the pieces I am showing you are part of my current and past collections. A few Titanic historians will know what this is. We will see the other side a little later. I am going to insert a few news clips that were done about my collection because I think they can add to the experience.
With a collection this large, it's surprising that what's now displayed in a corner of the Santa Rosa Home Theater showroom began only 5 years ago when he saw the movie.
And came out of the movie, and I told myself I'm going to try and get a piece of the ship no matter what it takes, and now I have probably, I believe to be about the 3rd largest collection in the world.
If you have any maritime artifacts you would like to know more about, please feel free to contact me. This film is mostly in chronological order from the building of the Olympic and Titanic to the recovery of items from the Carpathia. We will see a few one-of-a-kind items, such as the only complete collection of documents for one person to board Titanic. Most of my artifacts in this film have been on display in the Titanic museums in Branson, Missouri and Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, the National Geographic Museum in Washington, D.C., the Ronald Reagan Library in Simi Valley, and the Catalina Island Museum. When the artifacts are not on the road, they can be found on free public display in my audio-video store in San Rafael, California. Harlan and Wolff was founded in 1861 by these two gentlemen. This is the earliest White Star Line item in my collection. It dates to August of 1877. Deck plans were given out to passengers so they could find their way around the massive ship.
Well, it is hard to believe, but next month marks the 90th anniversary of the sinking of the Titanic.
The movie made us all fans of the doomed luxury liner, obviously, but one Santa Rosa man has a special connection to the film and to the remnants of the ship, touted as unsinkable.
ABC 7's arts and entertainment reporter Don Sanchez with a look.
And we are opening this for the first time ever since I've owned it.
Tony Probst and I are taking a first look at a layout of the Titanic that was given to passengers. It's one of hundreds of pieces from the ship and the film that he owns, displayed next to the high-end audio and video equipment in his store, Audio View Showroom.
I like to see people's expressions when they see it, and that's why it's all open to the public for free in the store here for everybody to see. I enjoy showing it off.
And share. A brass nameplate taken from Lifeboat number 2. There are only 6 of the nameplates known to exist.
These are early photos of Captain Smith on board the Adriatic. A fine example of Captain Smith's signature on Adriatic letterhead and menus that were used on board while he was captain. The The majority of the photos shown are the first generation prints from the original negatives. I have been very lucky to obtain a few negatives. Here you can see the double keel of the Olympic being laid and the section of the double keel where Titanic was torn in half. The construction of the Olympic started in December of 1908 and the Titanic in March of 1909. They both took only 26 months to build. Even the Titanic was prone to graffiti. No home rule had something to do with the conflict between England and Ireland. Here we can appreciate how massive the shafts and propellers were. Notice the size of blocking holding the ship upright. These blocks were used in the vibration tests of Titanic's huge engines before being fitted on the ship. Her anchors were equally as impressive. The Titanic had about 2,000 hull plates that were a whopping 30 feet long, 6 feet wide, and varied from 1 to 1.5 inches thick, and weighed in at 2.5 to 3 tons each. There were several major injuries during the construction and a few deaths. This photo was taken on the day the Olympic was launched on October 20th, 1910. Here are the powerful hydraulic rams that were used to launch the ship. There were very few items used for advertising Titanic. This advertisement for Vinolia soap has a complete 1912 calendar attached. Vinolia soap was provided in the first-class cabins aboard Titanic.
Happened on a cold Atlantic night, April 14th, 1912, one of the more notable disasters of the 20th century.
At nighttime, when you're alone in the building by itself and you sit and you look at the letters that somebody has written, a deck chair that somebody had died on, the life jacket that obviously somebody died in, it does bring out some emotion.
He owns hundreds of one-of-a-kind pieces, wood from the grand staircase, the world's rarest china, letters which can fetch $86,000 at auction, benches used in the movie, items which mark the end of time.
Here is an original Harland and Wolff plaque. One like this would have been mounted on the bulkhead just outside Titanic's engine room. My wife and I having fun on the deck of the Titanic Museum in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. As we move along, I'm going to take you inside a few of the museums that have displayed my artifacts. Our first stop is the grand opening of the museum in Pigeon Forge in Tennessee. There is also a similar museum in Branson that is equally as impressive. It is 6 o'clock at night and the finishing touches are still being completed to the museum, which is due to open the next morning. There's only 16 hours before the opening and there's still work being done to the magnificent grand staircase. We're being told it's almost done. This is the inlay from the port side of the newel post on sea deck on board the Olympic that had the large light fixture on it. The reason for such a large light fixture was because there was very little natural light down on sea deck. As the sun rises on opening day, we can see the grand staircase is nearing completion and honor and glory crowning time gracing the staircase. I'm with my good friends Craig Sopin on the left and Steve Santini in the center. This museum is as grand as the original ship. As you can see by the traffic, the opening of the museum is going to be a huge success. As we can see on the surviving ticket, Titanic was launched at 12:15 p.m. on May 31st, 1911. This ticket was purchased by Thomas Andrews and given to a friend so he could attend the launch. Written on the ticket is 14th April 1912, lost on our maiden voyage. I need help deciphering the rest if anybody can help. Regis Philbin gets the honor of launching this Titanic. As I mentioned, the photographs you're seeing are not copies of copies, but first generation from the original negatives. This is possibly Captain Smith on board the Olympic. Unfortunately, this glass negative is broken. This massive crane was used to install the heavy machinery and funnels. And here we have a piece of the crane. Here is the negative I have of the Olympic, and the super sharp positive I've made from it. It is so sharp we can clearly see the White Star Line flag that is a little over 9 feet long on top of the aft mast. There are 3 of these flags that I know of that exist today, and here's one of them in my store. The ceiling in this part of the store is 10 feet tall to give you a little perspective. I will tell the story of the bench and the blanket in the background a little later. This is another original White Star Line flag. Unfortunately, someone has removed the swallowtail. On board the Olympic, we see these wonderful lights mounted on the walls of the first class lounge. And if we look up above this photograph, we can see one of these lights mounted on the wall in my store. The light is actually much heavier than it looks. Now we're going to see a few pieces of White Star Line china from my collection. The top 2 shelves are items from the White Star Line and Titanic. Displayed on the bottom 2 shelves are items from the HMS Bounty. On the far right, we can see money recovered from the Andrea Doria. On the back wall is the only known lifeboat plaque from Titanic's sister ship, the Britannic, the 3rd of the Olympic-class ships. An 1892 menu from the first Britannic. Here we have a menu from April 3rd, the day she first arrived in Southampton, and a 3rd-class menu recovered from a body during the body recovery on the Mackay Bennett, and 3 same-day menus from the Olympic for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and 2 early menus from the Titanic. Anyone for ox tongue? And just for fun, I was sent this old photo of Agneta from ABBA holding something Titanic. I also have a lock of her hair in my collection. The girl in the photo, or someone in her family, must have traveled across the Atlantic a lot. These are cut from the letterheads from the corresponding ships. The menu holder is also from her collection. A few complete sets of White Star Line playing cards. We will get in depth with a few items you see on this shelf a little later. On the bottom shelf is a 63-pound bar of silver from the treasure ship the Etosha. And on the top shelf we can see a T-Rex tooth. And those are two large megalodon teeth that are laying down. Here is the rarest in maritime china, the infamous Spode R4331 plate, also known as the Millionaire Service, along with R4332 cup and saucer. To my knowledge, there are 3 Spode R4331 plates in existence. 2 of them without the Oceanic Steamship Navigation Company logo, and 1 with. There's 1 of each in my collection. The stunningly gorgeous Spode R4332 cup and saucer. I know of 7 of these saucers and 5 of the cups, of which I have 3 saucers and 2 cups in my collection. I contacted Spode a few years ago and they confirmed that there were only 192 pieces made in this pattern. 190 went on the Titanic and 2 were kept for the Spode archives, but the factory was bombed in World War II and the china was lost. Meet Chief Steward James Kiernan. At 9 a.m. on April 10th, James invited his wife on board the Titanic and gave her a cup of coffee in this very cup and saucer and told her to keep it as a souvenir. Some of my china on display in various museums. These plates were referred to as the Crown Pattern. 2 having the date of March 1911, which is supposed to be the production run for the Olympic, and the other is dated March 1912, which is supposed to be for the Titanic. I believe these 2 plates are an older version of the Crown Pattern using the intertwined WSL logo. The white china was used primarily for third-class service. It is believed that the plates with the gold rim were used on the Olympic and Titanic because their third class was much better than the other ships. It is also believed that the gold rim plates were used in first and second class deck service. This plate with a date of March 1903 precedes the Olympic class ships, so I believe that they were used as deck service. This very hard to find gray china was used by the crew, most likely on the bridge. This souvenir plate was sold in the barber shop on the Titanic. I purchased it from the late Kent Schultz, and unfortunately the backstory of this plate has been lost to history. This one was purchased on the Olympic. The first class china is often referred to as finger pattern, or more accurately it is called the small crown. A few pieces of first class china that we see here are dated March of 1912. a first-class butter pat dish, and egg cup. I have heard that goose and duck eggs were popular back in the day. These eggs are bigger, so if you flip the egg cup over, you can accommodate the larger egg. It is also possible the bottom is wider for stability. Most of the small crown patterns are in turquoise or blue. This is a very rare green. At the end of the display case in my store, we can see the beautiful rosebud pattern and the equally attractive bluebell pattern. The snowflake pattern stands out even when it's next to the stunning Spode R4331 plate. Here's my collection waiting to be boxed up and sent back to me from the Catalina Island Museum. Let's take a quick tour of Catalina Island and its museum. This is the casino that opened in 1929. It never operated as a casino as we know it. From what I understand, the word casino translated is gathering place. I was fortunate to get inside and was given free run of the building. The colors and design of the interior are stunning. You truly feel like you're going back in time. I felt like Christopher Reeve in the movie Somewhere in Time. There is even an original organ by the stage. I took countless photos on the inside, and these are a few of the highlights. On the top floor, when it opened in 1929, it was the world's largest uninterrupted dance floor. Just for perspective, that's me on the stage. All right, let's head off to the museum. Another famous ship that I collect is the HMS Bounty of Mutiny on the Bounty fame. The author Zane Grey was a big part of Catalina Island. I also collect checks from the biggest names in history, which you will see some of a little later. This is the check that Zane Grey wrote to the IRS, and this one by his wife. Another famous ship that I collect is the HMS Bounty of Mutiny on the Bounty fame. There have been 5 movies made of the mutiny, and the 1935 version was filmed on Catalina Island, starring Clark Gable. This is the only known link between the Titanic and the Bounty. Herbert Pittman, the 3rd officer on the Titanic, wrote to Pitcairn Island and asked for stamps from the island, as the island post office had just opened in 1940. Pittman had stopped at the island on his way to New Zealand. Another famous resident of Catalina Island was Norma Jean, or who we would later know as Marilyn Monroe. This picture was taken in 1943 when she was just 17 years old and married to her first husband. I asked around to see if anybody had tried looking for the location where she stood for this picture and found that nobody had even thought of looking. So, guess what I did? Not expecting to find anything 79 years later, I was totally surprised when I found all the locations where the photos were taken. These were taken directly across the street from the museum. Notice the downspout on the side of the building, and the rooftop is still there in the background. In these photos, you can see the sidewalk has been raised up. And this is the house where Marilyn Monroe lived on Catalina Island. In my check collection, I also have a check from Marilyn Monroe while she was staying at the Beverly Hills Hotel. And this is a signed receipt for a wax job to her knees and underarms while she stayed in the hotel. And here is a lock of Marilyn's hair. This is a poem she wrote while in hospital.
On hospital gowns, my bare derriere is out in the air when I'm not aware.
Then she goes on to write,
My pear.
which it looks like she started to rub out. I wonder what she was writing about. A receipt for groceries she purchased. Here, Marilyn is practicing her lines for the movie Bus Stop. It reads,
Pardon me. I'm sorry to wake you, but I wonder if you could help me. I'm being abducted, you know, kidnapped by him. I thought maybe as soon as we got someplace, I'd ask the driver to stop and let me off. But we've been driving for hours and we still don't seem to be nowhere at all. Not only that, but I'm freezing to death. I ain't got much on under my coat.
Back to the cabinet in my store. We will be taking a brief look at artifacts from the Bounty and Pitcairn Island. The script is from Marlon Brando's version of Mutiny on the Bounty. The Marconi key was given to me by Tom Christian, the great-great-great-grandson of Fletcher Christian, the lead mutineer of the Bounty. This Marconi key was used to communicate with ships passing Pitcairn Island. Almost identical to the one used on the Titanic to transmit messages for help as she sank. Behind the old Polynesian stone tools is a vent cover from the first-class smoking room on the Olympic. Here's an identical cover recovered from the Titanic. "14 of my photographs that I've taken on Pitcairn Island have been used in stamps, as well as some of my Bounty artifacts. The 2 horn beakers were purchased by the Bounty in South Africa and were with Captain Bligh in the launch. The singer Rick Springfield now owns the lifeboat plaque from Lifeboat number 2 that we will see a little later. He gave me a gift of this guitar that you can see him playing in the small picture. I'm sure he's played Jesse's Girl a few times. Here is the stained glass window from the men's first-class smoking room. On top we have a wing of a pterodactyl. It looks like the wing has been broken and quite possibly the reason it died. Wallace Hartley and his band were credited for keeping everybody calm as the Titanic slipped below the surface. None of the band members survived. Wallace Hartley's body was recovered almost 2 weeks later with this violin given to him by his fiancée Maria, along with his sheet music. Here are some examples of silver used on the Titanic and the White Star Line ships. In this case, we have White Star Line silver. The big bowl in the middle I purchased from Ken Schultz, which he named Big Bertha. An identical bowl has been recovered from the Titanic, as was most of the silver you see here. On the next shelf, we can see a White Star Line chalice from an onboard church. The watch was probably a gift for retirement or maybe a birthday present for a White Star Line employee. The tickets in the back are from Woodstock. The gold ticket is for the front row. There's a 3-day pass and a general admission ticket. You can also see a milk carton found while excavating the site after Woodstock. And here's a check written by the owner of the property where Woodstock was held. The Abba necklace to the right is the same one that Agneta is wearing in the photo. The key is from a prison on a pirate ship, and the 3 pieces of 8 are from 3 separate shipwrecks, including the Etosha. The whale's tooth in front was the first sperm whale caught off Pitcairn Island in March of 1824. Here we have a complete box of matches, gimbaled lamps from the first-class staterooms hung on the wall or were used on tabletops. Here is a better view of Big Bertha. This was most likely a trophy for winning games such as shuffleboard, and here we have a letter opener.
Probst has always been fascinated with the sea. As a child, he sailed with his parents around the world for 15 years. Oh, by the way, the movie collection. He has nearly 100 Hollywood autographs on canceled checks, including a stop payment signed by Groucho Marx. Movies, memorabilia, and entertainment appropriately in a modern media museum. In Santa Rosa, Don Sanchez, ABC 7 News.
This is my first store where I displayed my collection. The collection now is in my new store in Santa Fe, California. On the wall in front of us, we can see 3 frames that hold some of my historic checks. Here are a few. Archibald Gracie was a first-class passenger on the Titanic, and he survived the sinking. A rare complete signature of Pablo Ruiz Picasso. A check made out by Aaron Burr for $21,250 in May of 1800, and of course Alexander Hamilton. I hope they don't mind being together. President Lincoln, General Custer, James Dean, Elvis, Francis Scott Key, Buffalo Bill Cody, Annie Oakley, Amelia Earhart, Princess Diana before she was married, Winston Churchill, Robert E. Lee, Charles Dickens, the real Lawrence of Arabia, Ernest Hemingway, Queen Elizabeth, John Lennon, and the Rolling Stones. This is an example of one of our sound rooms. I invite you all to come and have a listen. On display here in Catalina Island is the only known collection of every document needed for one person to board the Titanic. Hilda Maria Hellström was 22 years old when she acquired this exit visa on April 4th, 1912. Hilda was born on the 7th of December, 1889 in Storotuna, Sweden. Hilda was booked on the Adriatic but was transferred to the Titanic because of a coal strike. She was given berth number 3 in cabin 135 on D deck, as we can see written on the bottom of her inspection card, which was the very last cabin in the stern of the ship. There were 3 bunk beds. Hilda had the lower bunk on the starboard or left side when you walked in the room. Hilda's baggage claim number was 2929. Here is her ticket and her ticket receipt. You can see her baggage claim number as well as her signature on the bottom of the ticket. If you look at the top of the ticket, you can see it was issued by Carl Eriksson. This is a very early postcard, purchased from the same office, which shows that Olympic and Titanic are under construction. Hilda was a very lucky third-class passenger. She managed to get into collapsible Lifeboat C, the last lifeboat to be launched on the starboard side, and the same lifeboat Bruce Esmé boarded. This is collapsible D, which is identical to C. You can see the canvas sides of the lifeboat, which can be collapsed to make the boat smaller for storage. The photo on the left was taken just before Hilda left Sweden, and the one on the right was taken in her garden in Highland Park, Illinois. Hilda died in her daughter's home on the 15th of March 1962 at 72 years old. Here are Hilda's papers on display at the National Geographic Museum in Washington, D.C. and Branson, Missouri. And at the Ronald Reagan Library. This is a sad story from the Titanic. James Williamson, also known as Pat, was a postal clerk and was assigned to the Titanic. His girlfriend Gladys promised him a kiss if he would get her a souvenir from Titanic's maiden voyage. Pat purchased this foot-long or jumbo postcard on board Titanic and wrote that he is fulfilling his promise, that this is a souvenir of Titanic's maiden voyage. Pat never got his kiss, as he did not survive the sinking. Not only was this card purchased on board Titanic, it was written on board and mailed from the ship, as we can see from Titanic's postmark, Transatlantic Post Office, number 7, mailed on April 10, 1912, from Queenstown, Ireland, Titanic's last stop. I like to restore old photos. This is the original photo of Gladys's father standing outside the inn they ran. And this should be very close to what the photo would have looked like originally. And here is the same building today. And here is a restored photograph of Gladys. She never married.
Now, see, here's the thing when you get to check out the auction with Tony. Because Tony is the man who has all these pieces, brought them to Guernsey's, we actually get to get them out of the cases. So I'm going to be very careful. And can you tell us about these?
Well, the one that you're holding is one of a kind in the world. And what you're holding there is an only written document by a postal clerk on Titanic. They all died, and because they were sort of lower class, none of their writings exist. And the story behind this one is this was his girlfriend. And back then, kissing was a big deal. It was like going all the way. And she promised him a kiss if he would send her a souvenir from the Titanic. And on the postcard, it written, he's fulfilling his promise. This is a souvenir of Titanic's maiden voyage. Of course, he never got his kiss because none of the postal clerks survived. Another significant thing about this postcard is RMS stands for Royal Mail Steamer. She actually had a post office on board. And there's very few known Titanic postmarks to exist. This postcard has Titanic's postmark on it.
So why are you letting me hold it?
The door is behind me.
Oh.
You have to get through me.
This postcard was purchased and written on board Titanic by Tom Franklin and mailed from Queenstown just before she sailed on April 10th. Tom occupied cabin D34, and he did not survive. This was probably the very last letter written by George Graham. It was written on Titanic letterhead with the original envelope containing Titanic's number 7 postmark. George was on a buying trip to Europe for Eaton's department store in Winnipeg, Canada, with 3 friends, Mr. Herod, Stanley, and Merrick. They had this candy dish made to commemorate their trip. Coincidentally, the number 7 on the top of the plate is Titanic's postmark designation. George occupied cabin B42. He died in the sinking. His body was recovered.
Written by Mr. Graham. He was a first-class passenger who didn't make it, and it's on Titanic letterhead, and it has Titanic's postmark here.
Probst has been in business in Santa Rosa for 20 years, but it wasn't until he moved to his new facility on Santa Rosa Avenue that he had these special display cases built for his Titanic artifacts.
William Stead was a first-class passenger on the Titanic. He was on his way to meet President Taft at Carnegie Hall, and it was rumored he was going to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. He was clinging to a raft with John Jacob Astor. Both drowned, and his body was not recovered. This is one of the last photographs taken of the Titanic as she was leaving Queenstown. I do have the large format negative for this photo. That is why the photo is so detailed. Notice the head of a person sticking out the top of the aft funnel that was used for ventilation. It is sad to know that most of the people in this photo would be gone in 4 days. These are the deck benches on board Olympic. The identical benches were of course used on the Titanic. Here we see Titanic's benches on the bottom of the Atlantic. And here is an identical bench from the Olympic, one of 3 that I know of that exists today on display in my store. This end piece was brought up from the bottom, and here's mine from the Olympic showing Olympic's building number 400 stamped to the bottom. Titanic was number 401. Even 2.5 miles down on the Titanic, we can still find our plastic trash. Over the years, it has been cut down and painted numerous times, and I'm about to remove the paint to expose the teak underneath. Here's my mother-in-law sitting on the bench having a sip of tea in white star-lined china. How lucky is she? The bench was the centerpiece at the Catalina Island Museum. I purchased this blanket from Ken Schultz back in the 1900s. It was given to him by a survivor, and that it had kept them warm in a lifeboat. Just think of the stories this bench could tell. Not only did the elite of the day use this bench, but the Olympic was used as a troop ship in World War I, and countless soldiers sat and slept on this bench. These are on display at the Ronald Reagan Library. These are remnants that were left over from the carpet, curtain, and chair upholstery used on the Olympic and Titanic. This chessboard was made from the wreckwood of Titanic. The wood was collected by William Parker during the body recovery on board the Minia. He later made a few things from the wreckwood, including this ornate chessboard and this inlaid box. Here's floor tile used in the first-class smoking room. These columns were used in select first-class staterooms. You can see the button used to summon the steward, and here is the button from this column. On the back we can see Olympics building number 400. And not only do I have the column, but also the base to go with it. An original ivory number 2 bed tag recovered by William Parker on the Minia. Here are 2 pieces of grand staircase wood from the picture frame made by William Parker from wreckwood from the Titanic. More Titanic wood recovered by William Parker. This is the home of Anthony Waite, who in 1935 attended the auction at Thomas Ward, who was scrapping the Olympic and selling off the contents of the ship. Waite's great-grandson found these keys in this shed on the property. I had the paper tested and it came back as paperboard with soft wood, unbleached craft fiber with a high percentage of Douglas fir. This paper was available in 1927 and later. It could not be determined if any artificial aging was done to the sample, and no UV fluorescence was observed. This is a brass door push from the Olympic.
And then there's the deck chair, probably recovered because somebody was clinging to it.
Also to know that somebody's life ended hanging onto this is also, it adds a little bit of emotion to it as well.
This deck chair on display in my store was a Christmas gift from Steve Santini, a well-known Titanic historian. I had the seat recaned because the original cane had rotted away. I did sell some of the original cane on eBay. Maybe one of you ended up with a piece. Steve can be seen in the photo in the background with the deck chair. Here are some blankets from my collection. They are the same blankets used on the Titanic and Olympic. However, these blankets have no known connection to either ship. And here we have a ticket for the Titanic's Turkish bath that would have been purchased in the purser's office on sea deck. Here's the ticket on display in the National Geographic Museum in Washington, D.C. I do not actively seat things from the movie, but I do have a few items. This deck bench from the movie was loaded with chewing gum on the underside. I assume from the actors sitting and waiting between takes. Here's also a miniature prop bench from the movie. And a section of the grand staircase and handrails from the first-class hallway. These are solid brass miniature stanchions used in the movie. Here we can see where they were used on the real ship. These were from the first-class dining room. Here we can see them being installed on the Olympic. These are miniature bollards from the front deck. And these are the actual photos that were on Rose's bedside at the end of the movie.
This is the bench on which Leonardo DiCaprio sat, and this is the cap the guy in the crow's nest wore when he said, "Iceberg, right ahead."
Steve Santini at the helm when the Titanic hits the iceberg in the Titanic Museum in Pigeon Forge. The guests or passengers get to touch the iceberg and experience how cold it really was that night. You can also stand on the ever-increasing angle of the deck as the flares were launched for no one to see. I am sure this was the expression of disbelief on all the passengers in the lifeboats watching the mighty ship slip beneath the surface of the Atlantic. Captain Smith is arguing with Thomas Andrews. Looks like they have come to an understanding. The ship is sinking. Captain Smith was Regis Philbin and I. Am I in trouble? Regis Philbin holding hands with my wife? Here I am with the captain and Stanley Lair, who has a very large collection of artifacts from the Titanic. I'm heading to the Ronald Reagan Library for the grand opening of my Titanic collection. This is what a collapsible lifeboat would have looked like, the same one Hilda Hellström was on. Looks like Ronnie and Nancy are quite tall. I'm 6'1". It was fun hanging out with Cameron and Ballard and hearing the stories of diving on the Titanic. Here's a brief tour of the Ronald Reagan Library Museum. They did a great job on recreating the Titanic debris field. This is an accurate scale reproduction of the Oval Office when Reagan was president. And here we have a section of the Berlin Wall outside the museum. Here are a few Marconis that were sent the night of April 15, 1912.
SOS! 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 We cannot last much longer. Engine room full up to boilers. Sinking fast. Exchanging signals with the Titanic. He says, "Tell Captain, get your boats ready, and what is your position?"
For me, the tragedy is brought home best by these marconograms, a series of cable messages from both the Titanic and boats that were nearby when the vessel went down. This message from the Carpathia to the Olympic brings you right back to the moment when the ship was lost.
My knowledge of the Titanic's position at midnight was derived from your own message to New York, in which you gave it as 41.47 north, 50.20 west. If such were correct, she would be in heavy field ice and numerous bergs. Hope and trust matters are not as bad as they appear. Are you steering southerly to meet us? We received a distress signal call from the Titanic at 11:20 and proceeded right to the spot mentioned. On arrival at daybreak, we saw ice 25 miles long, apparently solid, quantity of wreckage and number of boats full of lives. We raised about 670 soul. Titanic has sunk. She went down in 2 hours, captain and all engineers. Our captain sent order that there was no need for Baltic to come any further. So with that, she returned on her course to Liverpool. We have 2 or 3 officers aboard, and the second Marconi operator who had been creeping his way through water at 30 degrees for several hours. Mr. Ismay is aboard. Since midnight, when her position was 41.46 north, 50.14 west, we have been unable to communicate. We are now 310 miles from her. I am under full power. Will inform you at once if hear anything.
Carpathia is full of passengers. Now she has another 712 rescued from the Titanic and very limited space. The Olympic, which looks identical to the Titanic, has offered to take some passengers. Captain Rostron on the Carpathia believes it is not a good idea for Titanic survivors to see an identical ship.
Do you think it is advisable Titanic's passengers see Olympic? Personally, I say not.
Carpathia sent this message to the Olympic.
Mr. Ismay orders Olympic not to be seen by Carpathia. No transfer to take place.
They were afraid Titanic's passengers would not like to see, let alone board, a ship that was identical to Titanic.
Kindly inform me if there is the slightest hope in searching Titanic position at daybreak. Agree with you on not meeting. We'll stand on present course until you have passed, and then we'll haul more to southward. Does parallel of 41.17 north lay clear of the ice?
The Carpathia sent Olympic on its way with this message. On display at the Catalina Island Museum.
Have you communicated disaster to our people at New York or Liverpool, or shall I do so? And what particulars can you give me to send sincere thanks for what you have done?
There are a few photos of icebergs around the wreck site. No one knows for sure which was the iceberg she hit.
This is a lifeboat plaque off of lifeboat number 2. These were on the lifeboats that were screwed on, and they had a white Star Line flag with the lifeboat number on it.
In the center of the photo, we can see the lifeboat plaque from lifeboat number 2. Lifeboat 2 is the lifeboat you see hanging over the water on the port side. Lifeboats 1 and 2 were emergency lifeboats that were ready to launch at any time. That is why they are positioned over the water and ready to lower. Here we can see Captain Smith peering over the rail with lifeboat number 1 on the starboard side. The original glass negative of lifeboat 2 on the deck of the Carpathia. James Gandolfini is holding the plaque from lifeboat number 2. This bronze flag was mounted next to the name plaque on the side of the lifeboats. Fourth Officer Joseph Boxall was put in charge of lifeboat number 2, and these are his discharge papers. Notice he was discharged on the 16th, a day after the sinking, Even though he did not reach New York until the 18th, the discharge papers were filled out and signed on the 30th. All pay for the crew ceased the moment Titanic went underwater. This is a plaque from Olympics Lifeboat. Lifeboat number 12 is the center of the 3 lifeboats tied up at the White Star Line docks in New York. You can clearly see this very plaque on the lifeboat. There is an inscription on the back, presumably written when it was removed from the lifeboat and given to Margaret Devaney. Margaret loaned her pocketknife to a seaman who had a difficult time releasing the falls and helped guide the lifeboat to the water. She was gifted this plaque and flag by a surviving Titanic crew member. The Catalina Island Museum is displaying the lifeboat plaques from Lifeboat 2, which now belongs to the singer Rick Springfield, and Lifeboat number 12. They are now together for the first time since 1912. Lifeboat 2 was the very first boat rescued by the Carpathia, and number 12 was the last. This is Lifeboat number 12 being brought on board the Carpathia. Here are lifeboat plaques used on James Cameron's Titanic. This is a lifeboat plaque and flag from the motor vessel Britannic, which was launched in 1929.
Every piece of Titanic memorabilia Probst owns is extremely rare, including this life jacket, which did more harm than good.
Because they were made of cork and they floated very well, and you had a certain velocity, you know, obviously when you're jumping for more than 15, 20 feet up, when you hit the water, they broke your neck.
And here's something very rare, a life ring with a date stamped on it.
1912.
How many of these are in existence?
There are only 2.
All of the life rings on Titanic were blank with no writing. If you come across a ring that is inscribed with Titanic Liverpool, it is not authentic. The cable ship Minia was one of the 2 ships chartered by the White Star Line to recover bodies. If you look carefully, you can see the reflection of the Titanic by the stern. This is a piece of cable the Minia laid across the Atlantic. As the bodies were recovered, they were assigned a number in the order they were found. Here is body number 8, an unidentified woman. Notice the other coffins in the background.
And this guy here at the end, it gives me the chills every time I look at him. If you look at his hands, it looks like he's still cold.
This case was recovered by the Minia. It contained this bracelet, purse, and jacket. Above the case, we can see bag 155 that contained the possessions recovered from the body of John Gill. This is the envelope that was sent back to his wife, Sarah Gill. The ivory button was part of his possessions that were sent back in the bag.
The pride of his collection? A telling series of letters and belongings of one Jonathan Gill, a passenger. Tony purchased them from the family of Gill's widow.
And, these are letters from the White Star Line telling her that her husband was safe and he was going to be brought to Halifax, and then she got letters saying that your husband had died and his body was going to be taken to Halifax. Can't wait. No, it's, talk about adrenaline rushes. This is my adrenaline rush.
It happens often. A new purchase is delivered. But this one is special. The final piece for his tribute to Jonathan Gill.
So this is the Gill's marriage certificate. So John Gill, he was age 24, bachelor. He was a chauffeur. You can see I'm beaming from ear to ear here.
John died exactly 2 months after they were married. Here is Sarah Gill's birth certificate. Sarah Gill received this check from the Titanic Relief Fund for £4, 7 shillings and sixpence, with her signature on the back.
As we walk through Tony's collection, I soon discover that he is less interested in things from the Titanic than he is in the stories of the people behind them.
To me, this is a very emotional piece. It's Ida and Ida Strauss. They were the co-owners of Macy's. A lot of people don't know that owners of Macy's actually died on the Titanic. And Ida was given a seat in a lifeboat, of course, and Isidore was not allowed to go into the lifeboat. It was women and children only. And she said, I'd spent my whole life with my husband, I'm not going to leave him now. And they were last seen sitting on a couple of deck chairs, and that's all was known.
Just together to the end.
Yeah.
Tony managed to bring more than one tragic love affair to life. John William Gill and his wife Sarah were going to start a new life in America. The couple had been married just 2 months when John went over on the Titanic. His wife was to follow him after he set up house in the land of opportunity.
Every day, practically, he would write her a little love letter on a postcard. And there's a bunch of the postcards here, and they just have little short love notes on the back. It's some as simple as love you, and that's it. And others are a couple of paragraphs long.
After the disaster, John's body was recovered. When it was shipped back to England, his personal effects were placed in this small canvas bag, number 155.
John would write to Sarah almost daily. Here are some examples of what he sent her. Oscar Woody was a postal clerk on the Titanic. Oscar died on his 41st birthday, and his body was recovered 7 days later, body number 167, with a few of these facing slips in his pocket. Facing slips were attached to bundles of mail going to the destination on the slip. I believe the second stamp on the back was transferred from another facing slip while in the water. One day I will try and match it to another facing slip. This watch is frozen in time forever at 2:36 a.m., April 15, 1912.
And she finally went underwater at 20 minutes after 2 in the morning. And we can see that this watch actually stopped 15 minutes later, so it ran approximately another 15 minutes in the water or wherever it was before it stopped.
Across the room from the Titanic lifeboat plaques in the Catalina Island Museum is sheet music belonging to Wallace Hartley, the band leader on the Titanic, who was credited for trying to keep everyone calm as the lifeboats were being launched. This violin was found strapped to his floating body almost 2 weeks after the sinking. The violin was gifted to him by his fiancée, Maria Robinson. The violin and pouch are not part of my collection, only the sheet music that was found in the pouch. This is a photo of the Californian taken from the Carpathia as she passed her early in the morning of April 15th on the way to rescue Titanic's passengers. The Californian was within 10 miles of the Titanic and should have seen its distress flares. It is believed she either saw the flares and ignored them, or everyone was asleep because she had stopped for the ice and was going to resume at sunrise. This silk postcard was purchased on board Titanic and written on board the Carpathia, talking about sickness and death. Unfortunately, this postcard was glued into a book and was crudely removed. A series of Marconis sent after the Titanic has sunk, some notifying relatives and friends they are safe. A Marconi written and paid for by Charles Stengel, who befriended Mrs. Minahan and Mr. Minahan's sister Daisy, notifying friends they were safe, but they neglected to mention Mr. Minahan was lost. A Marconi written by George, who stripped off his heavy clothes, jumped in the water, and slammed to collapsible boat A. He was later seen standing in the lifeboat in his underwear. This bronze medal was presented to a crew member by Molly Brown. A card given out at the Titanic Memorial Service. This pin was worn by a widow at the Titanic Memorial in England. The Titanic Relief Fund was initiated by the Lord Mayor of London to raise money to assist dependents of crew and passengers who were left destitute. Following the disaster, there were donations coming in from all around the world for the widows and children, and this Titanic Relief Fund was established. Relief Fund checks on display in the Catalina Island Museum. From my check collection are 2 checks from first-class passenger Archibald Gracie, and this one from his grandfather. He occupied cabin C-51. A menu from the last night the Carpathia was at sea before arriving in New York with Titanic survivors. And this one is from a year later. An original painting by Ken Marshall for the documentary Search for the Titanic. These 2 cups were taken down to the Titanic. The pressure reduced them in size. They used to be smaller than this, and they have sprung back a little. A 185 miles west of Land's End lies the Carpathia, sunk in World War I by 3 torpedoes from German submarine U-55 at 9:15 in the morning of July 17, 1918. Amazingly, this recovered porthole still has its glass intact even after the 3 torpedo strikes, the sinking and impacting the bottom of the Atlantic, and its recovery. Not only is it intact, but after I painstakingly cleaned it, I managed to get it fully functional again. This is how it looked just after it came up from the bottom of the Atlantic. I believe the portholes were numbered to correspond to where they went on the ship. If there are any maritime detectives out there that can please tell me where porthole 106 would have been installed, please let me know. We can see a similar porthole in the gangway leading below with Titanic's passengers on deck. Here is Carpathia's third-class dining room where you can see the portholes are mounted horizontally. The porthole on the right was recovered from the Acadia on Ducie Atoll, which sunk in 1881. The crew sailed the ship's dinghy over 300 miles to Pitcairn Island, home of the Bounty mutineers. Below in the frame is the nail gifted to me by Lewis Marden from National Geographic, the person who found the Bounty. Hanging on the porthole is chain I have recovered from Carpathia's engine telegraph that was mounted on the bridge and communicated to the engine room with these chains. If you look closely, you can see the words port and starboard stamped into the bronze on the telegraph, and STA for starboard still visible in the white piece of glass. These are the pulleys the chain ran through. These scars would have been caused by the impact and shrapnel of the 3 torpedoes hitting the ship. This telegraph obviously went through a lot of stress. I spent a few weeks carefully taking the internal mechanisms apart, cleaning it up, and after putting it back together, I managed to ring its bell for the first time in 104 years. I experimented with various cleaners, and what I ended up using was CLR, soaking the pieces sometimes for up to a week. These are chains and parts that are removed from the inside during cleaning. We are at the National Geographic Museum in Washington, D.C., where my collection will be on display for a little over 6 months. At the entrance, we can see the Tower of Alban, the submersible that took Dr. Robert Ballard down to explore the Titanic in 1986, and the Porcelain Sphere. The walls are over 6 inches thick, and the titanium hull weighs 8,000 pounds. Wrap this all up with an insurance claim for 15 cases of fur. I wonder if they ever got reimbursed.
I like to see people's expressions when they see it, and that's why it's all open to the public for free in the store here for everybody to see. I enjoy showing it off.
Is there anybody out there? I think I need a lifeline. I've been drifting through the darkness, looking for the sunrise. So are we gonna sink like Titanic? Our problems feel giant.